Alright, so this is more about experimenting and learning cool stuff than it is about, I could strip this entire thing and start over, but that's not the point. What I've done is spray the black paint that I had into a can that I'm done with, and I got a little craft brush, and I am going to hand paint. I'm going to try this. Hand paint in these cavities, because I don't want the leftover cavities. The edge area of this is going to need to be blended, so I'm going to do that with a cloth while the paint's still wet. I'm going to see if that works, because I'm not positive it will. But we'll see. This bit just needs to be solid black, and there's just a tiny little spot somewhere. Oh, it's right here. That's still black. That's just where a bit of the urethane came off. So I'm going to experiment with doing a fill. And then there's a couple of dents in the finish. That's where there's a giant knot. And this, I'm not sure what that is. I think that's just a low spot from my hand planing. So there's a couple of dips in there, and if I just do a bit of paint touch in there, just a bit to fill it, I'll spray the entire back with urethane when I'm done. So that's going to set me back for the wiring, but I'm deciding I really don't want to do any wiring until I've satisfied all of this work that needs to be done. So let's experiment with brush painting. Well, as touch-up repairs go, this went pretty well. Problem is, it cost me like 36 hours waiting for this paint to dry. It's nice and dry now, but sheesh. Anyway, so I'm going to sand it, and the only thing I'm concerned about, I mean, these are all going to go well, with this exception, I have to fade this edge so that it bleeds a little more nicely from the red to the black and doesn't look like a straight line like that. Well, jagged line. At which point then I will have a slight depression which I'll have to fill in with urethane. So I've got a couple of coats of urethane to go, but that stuff dries quick. So let's get this thing finished so we can wire it up. It's not bad. Well, I got my Chinese neck, and it is in fact two-piece. The other one I got was a one-piece. I was thinking after I shot the video, oh, it doesn't make sense that it wouldn't be one piece, or it doesn't make sense that it might be, but in fact my other one is a one-piece, and it's just routed around this heel end here, where this is clearly a slab of maple glued on top of a neck of maple, and the seam is really obvious here, and you can see it not so easily on that side, but who cares? It's a nice neck. You know, definitely done quickly. There's a couple of little blemishes in the finish that I'm going to sand out. This is a 1600 paper. It's the finest stuff I could get at the local hardware store today. These are 10mm holes, and that's apparently just a pretty normal problem for Fender users that want to use the Cluson style tuners. I need the 10mm bushings. They don't come with 10mm bushings. So I've ordered those, again, China, so it'll be weeks before they come here. So what I'm going to do is use the original bushings, the ones that comes with, and just stuff some toothpicks up in this end, because the bushings don't hold the tuners in place, the screws do. So they're just keeping centered nicely. So the toothpicks will do until my bushings arrive, then I'll put them in. So in the meantime, just going to hit the front of the fingerboard with the sandpaper to get a couple of these little blemishes out. I put a bit of wood glue just to close up those gaps, just to make the gaps not visible, and that worked. The nut looks like it's in place properly otherwise. It certainly wasn't wobbling. And that's basically it. Then polish the frets. They look sufficiently level, so I'll just polish them up, put my guitar back together. Oh yeah, and I'll put a Fender logo up here. I think I still have one from my printing, what is it, the inkjet printing transfer paper. Well, there's some fretwork done. So it's a lot of tape. It's a lot of hassle. But these things are glowing, man. So it's all worth it. There's a couple of spots I'm going to sand on the fingerboard where the finish is slightly affected, but I filed the edges here. I actually got a metal sliver from one of these in the pad of my finger, and that sucked. So anyway, I filed the edges down so they are nice and smooth, and then hit them with that 1600 paper just a little bit, and a bit of polish. So looks good. I found a Kramer logo that for a laugh I might put on here, just for, you know, what the heck, but I don't know, might look funny, might look more appropriate, the Fender logo on it. So I'm going to put the logo on tomorrow, and I'll get all this tape off now. It's 2 in the morning, so it's, I think, about time we call it quits. And by tomorrow I should have the guitar put back together. What we're doing here is checking the nut slot depth. This neck came with a nut that was sitting really high, and I'm not sure if it's just because it didn't route deep enough. That's probably the case. So there was something like 2.5 or 3 millimeters of height. It was ridiculous. It's like unplayably ridiculous. So they all had to go down. Now in theory, like on a Gibson neck, you'll see that the strings, if you rub your hand across the top of the nut, you can feel each of the strings, because it should be sort of nestled in the nut, but not buried in it. These are now buried in it, which is necessary in this case. So you just have to make sure that the string's not going to bind by making the grooves a little more like a V. So anyway, when I'm doing the inner strings, it's my feeler gauge. In metric, this is 0.5 millimeter, 50 hundredths, I guess. And that's, roughly speaking, what you want for the strings. When you're measuring here, so if I put my capo here and then measure here, I'm getting something more like 20. And I expect to get that all the way up the neck. But you don't want the too low here, because then if you cut this too low, it will wear out over time, and then eventually you're going to have to replace a nut sooner than you think you'd need to. So as long as you're not leaving too much room, you're okay. So instead of the sort of 20, 25 that I'm measuring here, I'm doing 50, maybe 40. So to get the strings closer to the middle without having to take all the strings off all the time, I just use a little piece of wood to hold this guy up out of the way, so I can get a good angle coming in, and then I can feel we're just dragging but not really hitting it. And that's good enough for me. So here's the last string. This is the only one I haven't done yet, the low E. And I can feel the top of the string. It's half set into the nut, which is in theory a good way of doing it, but of course that's no good in this case because the nut's way too high. So got my little micro files. This one's good for 46. This is a set of 10s, 10 to 46. So what I'll do is lift the string out of the nut, just get it off to the side, and then use this guy at an angle that roughly approximates the way it drops. Now there's the angle that it drops on, but I don't really want that. I certainly don't want flat like this, so I want somewhere in between. So I tend to just sort of set my fingers underneath it and rub them on the fretboard while I'm dragging the fret in the groove, and just I'm sort of twisting the file a tiny bit just to make sure that I'm getting more of a V groove. I'm rocking the thing back and forth, side to side. It's a little hard to see what I'm doing, maybe. So as long as I get an angle that's in between where the string comes from across the fingerboard and when the string leaves and goes to the machine head. And don't do it for too long. Just make little adjustments and measure it again. Now I'm expecting this is still insanely high. There's tons. Like I can turn this thing almost sideways in here, and that's with 50. So I'm not going to try and figure out where exactly the measurement is. I just know where I want it to be and keep working on it. Come on, you. There we go. So again, find our groove and get my fingers on the fingerboard just so I've got a nice flat surface to work with. And always try and do whatever you're doing, do it the same way so that you're not getting an inconsistent groove. Because if you've got a groove with bumps in it, then the string's going to rattle in the nut and it's just going to make an irritating sound. So the whole point here is having a nice, smooth, consistent contact point.
I wouldn't normally talk for that long while I was sawing the nut, but I know that I've got tons of material that I've got to move. So anyway, you can see how a ton's there. This guy, there's a tiny bit of play with the 50. I want the top two guys to just have a little bit of play, but the rest of these guys getting a good contact. I can hear it dragging without seeing the string rise up. So there we go. Feelers using a 50-ish. If it looks like one's higher than the other, if I'm still having intonation problems, I'll look to make sure that they're all exact again. Again, get the neighboring strings out of the way using a little chunk of wood, so I don't have to keep restringing the guitar every time.